Hello and welcome to the Video Creator Show, where we talk the juicy details of how to succeed on YouTube. And what better way to do that than to talk directly to someone who has done it. Today, I am talking to Brady Shearer. He is helping churches navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. That is an epic way of saying that he is helping any spiritual community grow their presence and influence online. His company is called Pro Church Tools, the product of which is called Nucleus. Brady's channel currently sits at 129,000 subscribers and over 6.6 million total channel views. He's got a positive vibe and a ton of advice for how to grow your church or in-person community that would like to expand into cyberspace. We're going to get into the fascinating nitty-gritty of his mind and success, but first, the Video Creator Show is brought to you by VidChops.com, an editing service that helps take the burden of editing off your back. Check out VidChops.com to see how you can save yourself tons of time and energy while taking your YouTube channel to the next level. All right, Brady, I'm stoked to be talking to you today. Looking at all your videos, you clearly know what you're doing online. One thing I was curious about is how did you get started? So I'm guessing you're a part of a church, and at some point, somebody handed you the keys to a social media account and was like, hey, can you help us grow our presence online? Can you walk us through kind of your early stages of getting comfortable online with social media, with YouTube, all that stuff?
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. So I went to school to be a student pastor, basically a pastor working with teenagers specifically. So I have my degree in theology, which is study of the Bible, and youth ministry. And it was in my second year where I had to do an internship for the course curriculum. And so I get put into this new church, startup church in the city where I was living. And because I'm young, they say, hey, here's a DSLR camera. We need you to do some photos, some video, also web and social, graphic design, general communications. And so I started doing that, and I developed an aptitude for it pretty quickly. And then when I'm back in my classes, I'm looking around and I see all of my peers, and I recognize at that point, once they get into full-time jobs themselves, they're going to be put in charge of similar things. Because the thing about churches specifically is that the staff is generally very small. I'm a Canadian, so churches are even smaller here in this country. But even in America, average size church is between 50 and 300, the vast majority. And so they might have 1, 2, 3 full-time staff members. Very unlikely that one of them, especially in 2012 when we started our YouTube channel, would be proficient with the world of digital. And so as I was beginning to learn these things, I thought, what better way to give back than to share what I'm learning as we go. And so that was the impetus for starting the Pro Church Tools YouTube channel in 2012, July 2012. And alongside that, we started a podcast and we're blogging. Blogging was really, really big back then. And since then, we have built a company out of that. We're now primarily a software company, which at least when it comes to our products, but we've been doing the content creation for 10 years now. From 2012, we're now through 10 years here recording this in September 2022. And we're a team of about 20 employees now. We got a stateside location and then a Canadian location as well.
That's awesome, dude. So it sounds like it all started with social media, YouTube, and then you were able to kind of branch out into a company. Like you had this audience, and then surely that kind of fed into the success of your software company. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so as I was gaining that aptitude and affinity for digital media, simultaneously I was really getting enamored with the idea of building an online business. So a little background, my wife and I, who we have also been married 10 years, so you can do the math, got married and started the company in the same year. We were like 21, so I don't know if we knew any better. But she was working in insurance during the day, and she was working at retail at night. And then I'm a full-time student, I'm doing freelance. And we were living in Edmonton, Alberta, Canada, which for reference is the most northern major metropolis in the continent. And so it's like, have you ever seen that show Ice Road Truckers? It's like that in real life. Like it's bumper cars on the way to work. The roads don't really get plowed. It was a dark time, literally, because it's like 6 months of winter, but also, figuratively in our hearts. And so we were like, we didn't want to live a life where we had to spend the majority of it going by someone else's schedule. And so that was kind of what led me into this idea of online business. And I remember my parents were a bit skeptical of it at the beginning. And now as a parent of 2 children myself, I think I track with why they were skeptical and why they pushed me to complete my degree, even as the company had grown and hit 6 figures before I had graduated. But this idea of basically owning our time was what drove us to at least give it a shot. And at first it was just building that audience, because every course I went through, every community I was a part of that was teaching me online business kept saying, like, if you have an audience and you build trust with people, that trust can be translated into income. Might not happen immediately, but it absolutely can. And so we started with a productized service where basically we were creating videos for churches. Subscription model was about $300 a month. The videos were custom, and so we'd have a few churches sign up after we had built our audience up a bit. And then we transitioned into digital products. So we sold a course, and then we sold a subscription level academy type course, so ongoing courses delivered through that academy. And then eventually from there, we pivoted about 5 years ago to software, which has been kind of our really big swing at creating something that really can last, something that is affecting thousands and thousands of churches. And we've done pretty well in the first 5 years. We have about 3,500 paying churches on that platform right now, which is excellent. But software is a beast. And even 5 years in, it kind of feels like we're just hitting our stride now with what we're trying to accomplish. And so the future is bright, and there's still a lot of work ahead to be done.
Sure. Yeah, I totally get the struggle with software. I majored in software engineering in college, and that was great. But it can be difficult to get it all right and to get a smooth application that people actually want to use, that's easy to use, that is reliable. The nice thing about YouTube or social media is, yes, there's a lot of things to know, but at the end of the day, it's kind of about having a strategy, a good strategy, making videos, posting them, tagging things. Like, it's all, in my opinion, a bit more straightforward than software, where there's just all these lines of code and languages, and there's a lot to get right. So was there any particular reason you decided software was the right move for you? Like, you had this audience and you wanted to create a product. I know you already had this kind of subscription-based product, but then you wanted to transition into something a bit more tangible that you could sell. Why software?
Sure. So this was about 5 years into the company, 5 years ago. So halfway point as of this recording. And we had already, we had been a 7-figure business. We'd eclipsed the $1 million in revenue mark with a healthy profit margin for a couple of years in a row. Everyone that I'd hired was friends from high school because I didn't have any real skills when I started this. And I was like, okay, well, I'm sure Mitch can pick it up. I'm sure Tristan can pick it up. Roxanne, she can figure this out. And so I'm hiring all these people, and we're all working together, and things are great. We bought this office space, and we designed it and built it out from scratch, which was a fun project. But as I would reflect on where we were as a company, it felt like there were enough points of vulnerability that if we didn't consider maybe a change in direction, we wouldn't quite be as fortified and protected against something going wrong. And of course, this was pre-COVID and pre-recession. But financial markets and the economy don't go up and to the right forever. And so I was basically thinking, okay, if something went poorly, yes, we have this audience, which is number one, the most unfair advantage a company can have, because when you do pivot, you are able to basically take them with you so long as that trust is truly there. But also, a subscription level course, which requires me to create new courses and continue to deliver the type of platform that has high levels of churn, or our productized service, which had not as high levels of churn and a lot higher customer, value, per person, average revenue per customer. That was this like trendy type of video in the church world that felt like it had a sunset point where that trend would change. And so there are basically these forces outside of my control. I feel like I could do everything right, but if those videos kind of fell out of favor, if there was an economic downturn, if something happened, our company would be in trouble. And it wasn't just me. Like, I had achieved my goals with the freedom of time. We bought our first house. Like, we paid off our debt. Like, things were great with our family. But now I also was in charge of like my friends and their families. And so I wanted to do something that was a calculated risk at the time. Like, we had about $1 million saved in the bank, and it was going to cost that much to kind of get going with software, because we wanted to do software bootstrapped. Like, we didn't want to take investor capital rather. Like, we wanted to own it 100% and not feel like we had to make decisions based on what some, board of executives wanted us to do. And so we took that swing, and I think, hindsight is 2020, but I don't like to think of what things would have looked like if we had to subsist like entirely off of that productized service or off of the courses during the last 3 to 5 years, most notably the last 3 years. We've continued to see growth each year, albeit a little bit slower than before the pandemic a few years ago. But basically that protected us against what was inevitably going to happen. Like, things don't always go great. I kind of got lucky with timing. When we started the company, you have skill, you have effort, and then there's timing. And all three play a role in success. And, equal input doesn't always equal the same output. So you can be incredibly skilled. You can work extremely hard. If you're in the wrong industry, if you just get at the wrong time, the outcome might not be the same as somebody else in a different industry. So we had good timing. But what I recognized was that good timing isn't how things always will be. Things will change. And so that was kind of the business inspiration behind going software. But then there was also I wanted to build something that was truly remarkable. I liked sharing my expertise, but I didn't like monetizing through ads, and I didn't like monetizing through affiliate, and I didn't like monetizing through product influence sort of thing. So we've never taken a dime in any of those ever. We've always sold our own products. When your products that you sell are education, you always then have to be holding back something in your YouTube videos, in your podcast. And I didn't want to do that. I just liked giving away everything that I knew and learned for free. Once we built software, I had the freedom to do that. And if you wanted to do more with our company, you could buy the software. I can't teach you software. It's a tool that you can use. But that gave me the freedom to just teach and create content with complete freedom without having to strategically not do something or strategically say something which could lead to something else, which was really great also.
Mm-hmm. Totally. It's really important to have that freedom. If you're stuck in a really narrow area of YouTube or feeling like you have to cover the same things over and over, it can get tiring. I think your audience can get a little bored as well, even though maybe it's strategically smart. If you're constantly held back by your strategy, I know that can be really frustrating. I think that's great. You were able to build things more authentically. One of your videos that I watched, you went on a trip to the Faroe Islands, the islands off the coast of Denmark, and you filmed some videos and were able to upload them for free for people to download, use their own services. And I feel like that's the kind of thing that is really great for YouTube. That's the way to do a YouTube channel, is you're kind of living your best life and you're able to turn a camera on that and build a rapport with your audience, as opposed to a media funnel. It feels more authentic that way.
I mean, that's the ideal, right? We all have to make decisions for, a lot of times there are competing interests, and you can't have everything all the time. One example of that is, I got into this because I didn't want to have a real job, essentially. And you fast forward 10 years and you're managing 20 people, and a lot of my professional life consists of working with attorneys and accountants and managing interpersonal conflict and reviewing financial spreadsheets and projections. And I still get to create my content. I'm still the one that writes every script, and I'm the one on the podcast and on camera and recording everything. and then the rest of our team, they produce, publish, and share it. But like the longer we go and the bigger the company gets, the more of my work is the not so glamorous stuff, and less of it is the creative side. But that is the trade-off that you make to run something, a business that should last for as long as we would like it to, and one that can support everyone. As you know, all my friends now are having their own children and buying their own homes, and suddenly we're not just like, you know, half a dozen of us single in our early 20s. We're now like, oh, there's like a dozen of us and we're married and everyone's got kids in our 30s. And suddenly the stakes have been raised. And that kind of goes back to like the calculated risk that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes when I say like, oh, we spent $1 million on software and it worked out, but if it hadn't, that would have been like lost money. But, you know, that was a calculated risk early enough in our life cycle as a company, and then my own life as a human being, that if it had all gone wrong, we had like multiple backup plans for it. And so I think anytime you're like reaching for something and being ambitious, there's a level of risk. And so we always talk internally at our company about calculated risk and how we can be ambitious and take big leaps, but not being reckless while we do it.
Mm-hmm. So I'd like to ask you about carrying the weight of that responsibility. You talked about having people working for you. They're your friends. They're married now. They have kids. They have financial responsibilities, obligations. And you, as the person who started this company and who are managing things, like, do you have any advice for managing that responsibility, that stress? You talked about calculated risks, of course, and just being intelligent about where you're spending your money, diversifying, which you've clearly done a good job of doing. But I guess I'm thinking more emotionally, day to day, moment to moment. Like, what do you do to keep a clear head and to make sure that you're able to make these good decisions, even if they are a bit risky?
Yeah, sure. So we have a set of values in our company that we articulated really recently, like just in the last 12 months, that have helped like inform the decisions that we do make. We noticed that we all worked from home during the pandemic, and as we came back to work, like we noticed that like things didn't go right back to normal. It's like things had permanently changed. Like, again, a lot of us had kids, so suddenly like we came back and we went from like, you know, single folk to parents. And suddenly, like, everything didn't just seamlessly return. And so we realized that, like, okay, we need to, like, articulate some things to help guide us through what should be another 10, 20, 30 years of doing this if we choose. But, like, relational longevity is always something that I prioritize more than most things. I feel like anything in life that's worth doing or worth experiencing is something that probably takes a long time to achieve. The classic example is like, you know, being a healthy human being is not something that you can achieve through one great workout or one great day of eating. It's like, no, you have to do that for hundreds of days repeatedly, 80% of the time. And then you'll look back and say, oh, wow, one day it was here. And so when I think about relational longevity, like we hired mostly my friends from high school. So now they've been in my life for my entire adult life, let's say 10, 15 years. But we're also like late 20s, early 30s for most of us. Like I want them to be there in our 40s, 50s. Like so long as we choose to be in each other's lives, I want that to be a possibility. And perhaps I'm naive about this. You know, I grew up on sitcoms. And so I see all these sitcoms of people being like, oh, it doesn't really matter what they do. Their whole life is based around being friends. Like whether it's Seinfeld or the show Friends or Community or Parks and Rec or Brooklyn Nine-Nine. Like, oh, all of these workplaces just serve as a function for people to be friends. Ah, okay. I want a company like that. And so that's like a bit of the narrative that goes through my mind. And so I'll read you aloud one of the values to actually give an example of this. Let's see which one. Okay, so the first one on our Pro Church Tools values is called The Family You Choose. And the description says, relational longevity is our target, choosing to be in each other's lives through the ups, downs, and ever-evolving stages, toasting each other's triumphs, not abandoning another in grief. We know not every relationship is for life, but often our need to make a living will force change upon us that fractures our closest relationships. We want to invert this. We work to live. We don't live to work, because family should never be collateral damage. So that, as a value, becomes what inspires the decision-making. And so when we decide as a company, like, are we going to stash away another, like, 6 figures, or are we going to spend that on, a retreat for our whole company to like fly everyone and their kids out of the snowy winter of Canada down to, the Caribbean to spend a week together and just like do something that maybe would have not been even thinkable that we could do in our early 20s. But then only doing that after we have, several savings accounts that are full, so that if and when something bad does happen, we're able to fix that. When you have all of these contingencies in place, I guess what I'm trying to say is that the day-to-day becomes a lot less stressful, because you don't feel like you're just like one bad break away from something going poorly. You need those contingencies. One, they help you sleep at night, because you can go, oh, you know what, if that thing that I didn't want to happen does happen, well, we have enough money to cover that in the savings account, and we'll replenish that in 6 months when this happens, and we'll be fine. And that allows you to be sober-minded with your decisions and not make emotionally driven decisions. Instead, you can make missionally motivated decisions. Okay, here's who we want to be. Here's like the identity that we want to embody. When those contingencies are in place, you can make those decisions and not emotional decisions, which, we're all prone to. When things go bad, interpersonal conflict gets sticky, so...
Definitely. And I've had a lot of experience working with my friends as well. My YouTube channel, Treesicle, I started it with 3 of my friends in college. And to this day, we're all still friends. There certainly was some tension over the years. And that can be, it's like a blessing and a curse, right? You are working with people that you obviously get along with really well. You enjoy spending time with them. But then also, I think that usually there's this kind of disconnect between professional life and your regular life. And when you combine those two things, I think beautiful things can happen. But there's also it can make things more difficult in a way, because if somebody turns out to not be a good employee, and it doesn't sound like this was necessarily the case, or maybe you are having a conflict with somebody, like I feel like there's more pressure to really work out a conflict, whereas I think in a more normal professional environment, sometimes it's more likely to just like get rid of somebody, just kind of toss them to the side or something, which isn't necessarily a good thing, but I think also it does, like there's this added level of you really want to make it work when you're working with your friends. Like you've probably heard that advice, don't go into business with your friends. I certainly broke that. I have no regrets about it. It's overall worked out for me. But did you feel like sometimes working with your friends was more difficult than if you had just hired somebody else?
I mean, I suppose, like, in a vacuum, there are days when it would be easy to manage someone that you don't have a personal relationship with, but the pros so dramatically outweigh the cons in that respect that, like, to me, I would never make that trade-off whatsoever. So to answer you, no.
Right on. I think that's great. So as you've built this company over the years, you've diversified. It's been really awesome to hear how you've done that. Now I'd kind of like to go back towards the beginning here. When you're first starting your YouTube channel, you're starting your subscription service for churches and editing videos for them. Can you talk about how exactly you grew your channel in the first place? Like, there's usually this kind of delicate balance of offering free information, and then that kind of feeds into your company that's more behind the scenes. So did you have a strategy there? Like, obviously, the main appeal of your channel is teaching churches how to grow their presence online, and your company started out by creating videos and helping churches grow their business online. So there was a very obvious connection there. But how did you kind of feed one into the other? Were you just kind of like, oh, this is a good idea, I'll make a video about it? Or was it more strategic?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's been some ebbs and flows to that. The channel's been around for a decade now. 600 plus videos have been published. There were times when it was really consistent, like every single week for extended periods. There were times when it was a little more intermittent. And, social as an industry is what, 15 years old? 2007 is Facebook public registration, I think. So like, 15 years old is nothing in the grand scheme of industry. When you think about social and the force that it plays in the everyday life of most human beings, at least on the continent that I live in, like that is a dramatic change in culture. And that's why we always say, as you said in the intro, like we help churches navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. Like it's the biggest since the printing press. And a big part of that is the removal of gatekeepers, where now I can have a YouTube channel, you can have a YouTube channel. In the church world, I probably wouldn't have been able to like gain a platform in the conference world, the book touring world, until I was maybe like in my 40s. And the truth is, at least like in the evangelical world in America, like I would have a huge leg up being white and a man. If I was, a person of color or a woman, I probably would have a much, much harder, path to get there. The YouTube channel allows like any one of us to create something. And if we are skilled and, again, timing and hard work, it can work out for all of us. So there were times when I felt like I was being strategic. There were other times when, you just kind of like strike gold. And that's when you do 600 videos, like over 10 years. And the reason I mentioned that social's history is because like a lot of social has changed in those 10 years. So like right now we're going through another change on social where all platforms are trying to be more discovery based, following the blueprint of TikTok. Whereas like, a few years ago, everything was stories. And a few years before that, like Instagram was changing the game with like photos and like aesthetic. And YouTube's really only one of the platforms that's basically been like very similar for a long time. Yes, it's getting into shorts. But kind of similar to blogging, it was just a lot of basics, search engine optimization and making videos that, straddle the intersection between my skill set, but also what my audience cares to hear about. And it's always a bit of a balance, it's like a one video for you, one video for me kind of thing, where a lot of churches want to hear about stage design. They want to hear about live streaming. And I'm not particularly passionate about either of those things. I would much rather create different types of videos, but those are my most popular videos. And so there's always a bit of a balance between like making stuff that will grow the channel and meet the needs of my audience, but also then me trying to go, hey, there's actually like deeper things to consider here. There's a much bigger world of online worth exploring, not just rebroadcasting your in-person services for people to kind of like watch as a fly on the wall. There's more here. And so, sometimes there's doing videos to get the entry point and reaching a wider audience. And then there's depth. We always talk about like going deep and going wide. It's like you want to go wide enough to reach a big enough group, but you also want to go deep enough that there's substance there. You can create a lot of like surface level content and you might have a ton of subscribers, but if the depth isn't there, then the level of trust is also not going to be there. And that makes things more difficult to translate to building a business and doing something for the long term. If you don't have that depth of relationship, that also means that if whatever you're doing goes out of style, goes off trend, then people might leave and do something else. And so managing that width and depth is always something on the forefront of our minds.
Mm-hmm. And I feel like the key word with depth is usually authenticity, and you're presenting at least an aspect of yourself that is true to you. You're not just following trends. You're not just doing silly dances to songs that are really popular right now, though clearly that does work to a certain extent, but not for depth. Was there, like, how did you walk that balance between what you think your audience wanted and what you wanted to talk about? So you had these videos about sound design, kind of live streaming a sermon or something like that. But then there's the other types of videos that you were more interested in making. Like how day to day, how did you deal with that struggle exactly? Was there a strategy, or was it just kind of like, okay, that seems like a good idea, I'll make that. And now I feel like making this, I'll make that. Was it kind of more off the cuff like that?
Yeah, I haven't been probably as like systematic with that as I could have been. Usually how it played out was like I would do a sprint of like videos that would reach really wide, and then I would do a sprint of videos that would reach really deep. So you'd kind of like go down one path for a few weeks or months and then switch for a few weeks or months, recognizing like, with YouTube, like videos will randomly pop off months later once like they just get, proprietarily indexed in whatever way that YouTube decided today, hey, this is the video that's going to pop off. And so, and he would also be like motivated, oh, I want to like grow a bit faster. So let's make a bunch of videos that we know index is going to, that we know YouTube might preferentially index. So we do that for a little while. And then after a while, you know what, like I'd like to do something that's a little more substantive than just like gear reviews and like that sort of thing, because there's more to this than that. I guess. So then you go in the other direction, and then you do that for a while. And, hey, it's probably time to make some more videos that people like again. So.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that sounds like a really valid strategy, honestly. Like the short sprint idea makes sense to me, because you kind of do this for a while, then you do that for a while, then you go back to this, then you go back to that. I feel like that mixes it up, especially I remember you said earlier, you never wanted to have a real job. I feel like people with that mindset, I'm one of them, we get bored doing the same thing really easily. It's kind of a blessing and a curse. So by doing that, I feel like you were able to utilize that part of you and work with it in a positive way, as opposed to trying too hard to make content that was inauthentic to yourself, or trying too hard to always make content that was authentic to yourself, which in a way can be more exhausting. I've gone through long periods where I only wanted to make videos that I wanted to do, and that was cool, but it's also a weird amount of pressure versus making videos that you think are going to do well. It's almost like you're showing your soul to people with these really super duper authentic, creative edge videos. And these other ones, it's closer to like a job. And I think there's value in both of those things, in both of those kinds of work. And I think it's great that you found that way of doing both.
Yeah, and I mean, again, just kind of looking back, I guess that's how it played out. I don't know if I was always being like as aware of that. And the thing about starting a company YouTube channel, like when you're 21, now being 31, is that like, you're going through this professional journey at the same time, like you are self-actualizing as a human being. And one thing my mom always said to me when I was young, which is kind of a weird thing for a mom to say, but like, this is exactly what I would say to my kids too. She's like, your amygdala won't be fully developed until you're 25, son. Your prefrontal cortex won't be fully developed until you're 25, son. It's like, you won't be able to make good decisions. You'll make some good decisions, and then you'll make a terrible decision randomly. She's like, that's because like your brain, yes, the government says you're an adult and they gave you a driver's license, and yes, you can buy alcohol and buy lottery tickets, and but there's a reason we don't rent you cars until you're 25, because we know that a person's prefrontal cortex is not going to be developed until that time, and so your decision making just won't be that sharp. And so like you go through all this, and like, so even saying that, make videos for yourself, like you're on a journey like discovering your voice as a creator. But if you start when I started, like you also are just discovering you and what you like and how you talk and what you value, and then you look back a few years later and, oh, that was immature. I need to like grow up a bit in that respect. And then you're also developing your voice as a creator, and then people give you feedback on that, and you're realizing, oh, I need to like change that a bit. And then there's the whole aspect of what you said, which is like the persona that you put online is curated to a degree, because it's impossible to like be 100% you online. But it also needs to be authentic, even as it is curated, which is a bit of a paradox, kind of two competing interests there, which is its own thing that you need to work out. How much do you show, at least from an effectiveness standpoint? Like I run a YouTube channel that helps churches navigate the world of digital. Well, I have many interests beyond that. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, people I'm sure want to hear about those interests. And there's a part of that that's true, but you also have to stay pretty like 80% of the time focused on what people came to you for the first place. And so, yeah, lot of rambling on my part here, but there's competing interests and trying to figure it all out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, man. I mean, that's the game, that's the journey, and it's it's important to be aware of that. And it sounds like you've handled it really well. You mentioned earlier, just kind of transitioning a bit here. You mentioned earlier a current shift that is happening on all social media platforms right now, especially on YouTube, which is the discovery-based content, the short form content. TikTok, of course, is the one that really started this. Can you talk about what exactly is happening right now, and maybe give some advice on how you would recommend riding that wave properly.
Yeah, gladly. So Meta reported its first drop in revenue in its history pretty recently. And in a call, either with investors or with a specific news report, Zuckerberg said, like, within the next year, the content that you see in your feeds on Instagram and Facebook that's from accounts you do not follow is going to double, signaling like what we're already seeing. And, recently we had Instagram roll out their new newsfeed experiment. I don't know if you got it, I got it, where it scrolled just like TikTok. So instead of just scrolling and the posts wishing by, you get locked onto one at a time. Scroll, lock. And basically what Instagram was giving us was the worst of both worlds, because it wasn't letting us see the people that we follow, that we choose to follow, our friends and family. It was like, no, we're going to show you content that you like. The problem was it didn't show you anything it liked. It felt like every third thing was an ad that wasn't properly fitted for my screen. It was like oddly cropped. And that was a pretty big embarrassment for Instagram. So they walked that back and said, okay, back to the drawing board, but we're going to keep doing this. And to me, this is a pretty monumental moment in the history of social, because up to this point, Facebook, due to its social graph, its connection with friends and family, has essentially been able to just overtake any platform that has opposed it. So with Instagram, they just said, okay, write a check for a billion, which was unheard of at the time, and they'll join us. Or with Snapchat, like, you're not going to take 3 billion? Fine. We'll just put stories into our own platform, and that, hamstrung Snapchat's momentum and growth trajectory. And the reason they're able to do that is because they have your friends and family in their interface connected to you, and they've had it for 10 years, 15 years now. So when you log into Facebook, it's like 8 years ago, you did this. That's a good example of like how deeply entrenched we are. And prior to TikTok, every single social platform was based on the social graph. So how does a platform actually break out of this grip that Facebook has on the world? Well, you invent a platform that doesn't rely on the social graph whatsoever. It relies not on your friends and family, just one friend. And that friendship is you and the algorithm. And that completely changed how we approach social, because I don't know if you had this experience with TikTok, but you download a new app and it's like weird and foreign. And TikTok was the first app I think that I had like great deal of difficulty like transitioning to, because I'm old now apparently. And
I know the feeling.
But then like shortly after, I was like, yo, TikTok is the greatest thing that's ever happened to me. Like it keeps showing me things that I don't even know that I like, but that I love it. And like I'm learning so much, and I'm being exposed to things that I never would have been exposed to because my friends and family weren't talking about it. But TikTok's like, hey, if you like this, you might like this. It was like in the world of music, a DJ that could always show you new music that you loved, like the vast majority of the time. But now it wasn't just music, it was like any interest you might have. And it was amazing. So much so that Facebook and Instagram are like, we need to be like that. And YouTube's like, wait a minute, if anyone is in charge of YouTube video, it should be us. We can put this in our platform. And so what's coming next is really interesting, because Facebook turning its back on the social graph to an extent, because they're just starting to like kind of taper off with income starting to decline a bit. We need to do something to change. That might be the first step to them actually like diminishing in a substantive way. Because if they turn their back on what has made them great and protected them against every oncomer so far, they might actually like lose that kind of monopolistic stance that they have in the world of social, because I don't think that they'll be able to do what TikTok has done. I'm not confident that they'll be able to develop an algorithm that will rival TikTok. And I think in the process of them spending aggressively and the time it takes just to develop an algorithm like that, and the fact that they're not starting from scratch like TikTok did, I don't see it as achievable. And I think that what we go from there is like TikTok's legacy. And I think Cal Newport said this in the New Yorker. He was like, TikTok's legacy might end up being not them taking over the social world, but them forcing Meta to do something that eventually led to their downfall, and thus kind of liberating the social internet to not be run by a monopoly anymore. And we can get back to like, where the internet is weird and There's lots of different pockets of it, and there isn't one company that owns everything, which in most industries is usually a good thing. So big picture, that's kind of like a really interesting thought about where we might be headed. Right now, it's really disparaging seeing these platforms that I once really enjoyed kind of like going to crap, and that's frustrating. And the fact that everyone's trying to be discovery means that like the discourse online is becoming more and more like toxic, because the thing about TikTok when I first started using it is it reminded me like with about Facebook ads. So I would run Facebook ads and you would introduce yourself to new audiences, and sometimes you'd get the wrong audience and they'd curse you out. You'd be like, hey, that's Facebook ads. With TikTok, you're always reaching new audiences. And so like most comments are people cursing you out in ways that are not even like industry related. Like I made a video last week and the video was like, here's a problem. Here's solution A, here's solution B. And every comment was like, have you ever thought about solution A? And I was like, it was like the first thing I said in the video. Didn't you watch the video? No, that's just like how, but they don't know who I am. So they're not watching to see. They just hear like a hook and they're like, here's what you should do. I'm like, well, the video was 35 seconds long. I mean, I put the solution in there. So now more and more of social is becoming like that. But I feel like every one of my apps right now is just like angry comments from people that like, you don't know and you haven't built trust with. And fewer people that choose to follow you are seeing your stuff. And now I sound like old man get off my lawn. Like back in my day, social used to be like this. But these are the ebbs and flows of something that's only 15 years old. And the good news is if you're newer coming to this, there's still plenty of new opportunity for you to establish something meaningful and build an audience. The bad news is if you've been doing it for a little while like me, is that you keep having to retrain yourself and relearn because everything keeps shifting. The inverse of that is working in the church, working in healthcare, working in education, working in government. Change happens at a snail's pace. So if you are in a good place, life is good. But if you're trying to break into those industries, it's very challenging. So, it's different worlds.
Mm-hmm, totally. Wow, that was an amazing, detailed answer. I'm clearly you keep your ear to the ground with all this. Is there a way that you stay up to date in particular, or are you just kind of always consuming articles, videos about what is changing the trajectory of things? Like, this is something I've kind of struggled with, is this balance of wanting to stay connected to what's going on in this really fast-paced environment, but also not driving myself crazy. Like actually last night, I just uninstalled the YouTube app from my phone because I was spending too much time watching shorts and videos, and now I can only watch it on my laptop or my desktop. But it's like I learned a lot by being plugged in like that, but it also would eat into my life. Maybe some of this is just discipline. Maybe I just needed more of it. But how do you find that balance of like staying up to date with this ridiculously fast landscape, but also not getting consumed by it?
Well, the one benefit I do have, because I don't know if I have like a great answer for you, is that, working in the church world, everything is about a decade behind. So as long as I like check in with the changes online every so often, I can then parlay that to my audience, and they're like, "Wow, this is ahead of the no, this is he's ahead of the game. We got to make these changes." I used to listen to a ton of podcasts and I read a ton of books about social, about business, and eventually I got to the point where I was like, because I'm an ambitious person and I'm like the personality type that is like always wanting to like achieve goals. So I would listen to a podcast and it would inspire me to do something. And then I would start that thing. And in the process, like abandon the thing that I had committed to like just a little bit before. In business, I have mitigated that by having a team. So I will start something, create a system for it, and then pass it off. So it's never been detrimental for the business standpoint, but for like my own personal health, I could never really like stick to something or just be very like shiny object syndrome, because there's always so much that can be done. But is it what needs to be done for you right now? The way I got out of that loop was I started getting quite religious about how I tracked everything that I was doing. And I would set goals for myself in certain areas, whether it be content creation, fitness, eating, certain like spiritual disciplines, or just like practices. And then what I would do is I would track everything that I was doing religiously. And then that process of tracking kind of took the place, substituted for my continual need for like novelty or something new. And, I think in reading about compulsive behavior or addiction or about like just building habits, one thing you often hear is like, it's very difficult to like eliminate a habit. It's much easier to substitute what you're already doing for something else. And you mentioned earlier about like, one of your strengths being also one of your weaknesses. And that's true about every one of us. Like the things that make us great when twisted can also be like really damaging and harmful. And so having that self-awareness and understanding like your own DNA and how you tick, and then almost like gaming that to reach the outcomes you want has been tremendously helpful for me. And that's been something I've really started doing in the last like 36 months, like 2 to 3 years. Because what I found was I could never meet all the needs in my life. So when work was doing great, family was suffering. And when work and family were doing great, health was suffering. And basically I was just juggling, and like one thing had to take priority where the others lost. And because I'm stubborn, I was like, I refuse to accept that this is how things have to be. I just need to be more disciplined. And what I found was, at least for me, that my personal health was kind of like the cornerstone habit that would influence everything else. If I didn't have energy from like dawn until dusk every day, then I couldn't meet all the needs of my life. Like I run a business, I'm married, I have 2 kids, I have my own interests, I want to like stay healthy. Like there's a lot of needs that need to be met. So I found that like once I got my personal health in order, I had the energy to meet all of those needs. And then once that was there, I had to make sure that yes, I engage in hobbies and personal interests, because I'm not the type of person at all that's like works 16 hours a day. Like I work about 20 hours a week now, which, it took 10 years to get to that point, but I like the interests that I have. And so I have like, I explore those things as well. But like most things, I don't let it be everything. It all happens in balance right now. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm glad that's something you were able to figure out. That was also something I figured out recently, was personal health, mental health is really the foundation for everything. There's a lot of talk about hustling and working really hard, and that's fine. But sometimes it can feel unrealistic if you're not properly balancing your own needs and emotional requirements. So I recently have started going to the gym more. I've been a pretty avid meditator for almost a decade now. And I find these things, they, especially in times of really high pressure, or there's just a big load that I have to carry. It's like the difference, I think, between failure and success can feel like it's on a bit of a razor's edge sometimes, and you really need that extra clarity and focus and emotional stability that I think comes from, fitness, meditation, whatever you need to do to make your body and mind as healthy and clear as possible. So totally agree. I think that's a very wholesome, holistic approach to things.
Well, and just to be clear, this isn't how it always was. And so I don't want it to sound like, oh yeah, as things were being built from the ground up, everything was like nicely balanced. No, like right. My wife was working 2 jobs. I was in school freelancing. And the only time I had to work on the business was like before I left for school at like 8:00. So I had to like start getting up at 5 to give myself 3 hours a day to work on things. And like, I remember in those early stages, my mom, who I mentioned twice now, my biggest mentor, she was like, you won't always want to like work this hard. This is not going to be you probably when you're 30, 40, or 50. But you're young and you got like a lot of ambition right now. Like, squeeze it for all it's worth. And so like, if you think of like the needs in your life, and ideally they all get met to the degree that they need to, but there are also seasons of things. So there were seasons where I was borrowing from like my personal health, and I was borrowing from my marriage, and I'm borrowing from my social relationships, and I'm borrowing from like personal interests. And it's all going into this thing because I'm like, I think if I put enough into this now, it'll pay off in the long run. It's like any type of, investments. Like, yeah, it doesn't feel great to put 10% of your paycheck or 20% of your paycheck into savings. I can spend that now. But if you put it here Fast forward, and suddenly it's become a lot more, or it's there when you need it in the form of an emergency fund, let's say. And then after you've like built something, then you can go, okay, where am I overdrawn? Okay, I've really like taken a bunch of my personal health. Okay, I need to like refocus there. But I've got the business now where it needs to go. And so like, I just don't want it to make it sound like to like those watching or listening that like, oh yeah, you can achieve something extremely ambitious and maintain perfect balance to get there. So I don't know, maybe. That's not how it worked for me though.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and same here. I definitely did not want to give that impression either. You're constantly trying to achieve this. It's a process. It's a very imperfect and kind of messy process, honestly. It's not like, and even now, like, sure, I've been working out more regularly, but there's always the threat of like, well, at some point I may need to borrow, as you said, from my physical health so I can work a bit more or hang out with friends more, like just sort of based on what I need at the time. And that can feel a little more chaotic than maybe it can seem on paper, kind of having this balance. It's a good idea. I think it's an ideal to always shoot for, but it's important to be kind to ourselves when we maybe are not always meeting that ideal.
Yep, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Well, Brady, this has been awesome. I really love your perspective on things. Thanks for sharing kind of your whole journey with me. I feel like I learned a lot. It seems like you just have a lot of different avenues that you have approached your online presence with, and I think that's smart. It's commendable, and I appreciate you taking the time to talk to me today.
I appreciate the invite. I had a blast. I don't normally get to talk shop about behind the scenes stuff, and so every opportunity I do get for that is very enjoyable for me.
Mm-hmm. Right on. Yeah, that's what we do here at the Video Creator Show. Why don't you remind people where they can find you, all that good stuff.
Yeah, so if you just search my name on any of the major platforms, that's how you'll find me. Brady Shearer, Shearer. Brady like the bunch or the quarterback, and then Shearer is it is derived from one who shears sheep. So we are shearers. It's probably the worst last name. I'm very sad that my wife had to take it. My wife's last name prior to being married was Frank. I feel like Brady Frank would have been a good name, like if I could do it all over again. But alas, Brady Shearer, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, all that good stuff.
Right on. There you have it. Thanks again for joining me. And whoever you are, make sure to like, subscribe, follow whatever platform you're on so you can hear my voice in the next one. Later, everybody.